Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would clarify a point because it did create a little confusion. I thought I would go a little more in depth into it. And that was that video that I did on Monday, the final part of the Q&A. I mentioned to people that when you're consuming large amounts of protein, and the reason high protein diets are recommended for people trying to gain muscle mass, or even people trying to preserve muscle mass when losing weight quickly, is not because you are using all of this protein that you're eating to build new muscle tissue. And if people really look at the math behind that, it would be very, very apparent as to why you can't possibly be building new muscle tissue with anywhere near the majority of this protein that you're taking in. And there's actually a different reason why high protein intakes are anabolic to muscle tissue. That has nothing to do with providing the building blocks. In fact, the amount of building blocks that you're providing are very, very minimal. And case in point, remember the studies that I have linked you guys multiple times in the past when discussing things like anabolics or testosterone, when they've taken healthy young men and injected them in various doses of testosterone, and they have them consuming as little as 90 or 100 grams of protein a day, and every single group gained more muscle than the other group on the same protein intake that most of you would consider very low, depending upon the amount of testosterone they were in. So a group that got 125 milligrams of testosterone averaged this much muscle growth, the 300 milligrams got this much, the 600 this much. They grew based upon the dose of the testosterone without any increase in protein intake. And these were sometimes dramatic differences. We're talking about each one of these groups gained like a pound of muscle per month more than the other group, extending out for 5 months in like 20-week studies, to the point to where we had groups on testosterone gaining over 3 pounds of muscle per month on average while consuming 100 or less grams of protein a day. Well, noob gains, someone who is a noob making the best gains of their life that they're ever going to make, not on drugs, can't hit those type of numbers. The cutoff is around 2 pounds of muscle per month, and that's considered phenomenal for a noob to be gaining that. And you'll reach a point to where you'll cut down to a pound and then a few ounces eventually per month. And the amount of building blocks it takes to do that, as you can see from that example, isn't as high as people think it is. This is being done on 100 grams or less, and people say, oh, well, it's the anabolics. What is the anabolics? So the anabolics are providing anabolic signaling to the muscle tissue. But they can't create building blocks. Anabolic steroids do not create protein out of thin air. The human body doesn't create protein out of thin air. We have to have an energy source for it. We've got to have the building blocks. These are building blocks. So they were getting enough building blocks to be building 3+ pounds of muscle per month with 100 grams or less protein. So put that in perspective. When you look at it from a metabolic perspective, what you need to maintain your muscle mass is someone who's just a healthy person. Let's say you're a 160-pound male. You don't really lift weights. You might exercise just moderately or casually, not be out of shape, but you'll find that that person can get by on the RDA on protein. They can eat 50 or 60 grams of protein, maintain all the muscle mass in their body, maintain all their hormone function. Their body will heal itself. It'll regenerate. They'll be fine. All their metabolic and health needs will be met by that. And if they want to gain muscle, let's say that that's all you need to gain muscle mass. Let's say that 60 grams a day will maintain their muscle mass. Well, how much more do they need to build muscle? If actual new protein is needing to come in, let's say 60 isn't enough to build any muscle. That just covers all their health functions, metabolic needs. And no, guys, you're not breaking down muscle tissue and using the proteins up when you lift weights unless you're not getting sufficient calories. That's a sign that you have a nutrient deficiency. You're not eating enough dietary carbs, if that's happening at any exceptional rate, any more than you could replace with just a few grams of extra protein a day. So let's say that few grams, just to cover the tissue trauma from the weightlifting, is another 5 grams a day. That's a lot more than people realize in the grand scheme of things. So let's say that you need 65. So how much more do you need to build muscle? Well, how much protein is in human muscle tissue? It's approximately, and this could be off by 10 grams, 10 to 15 grams either direction, but about 100 grams. Some will say 90, but we'll go with 100. We'll be conservative here. 100 grams of protein in a pound of human muscle tissue. In order to gain 2 pounds of muscle per month, you need to add 200 grams of protein to your body over the course of that month. Well, if you already need 65 to cover all your metabolic needs, repair the tissue trauma from the training and everything else, you've got to come up with an extra 200 grams every month. Well, divide that by 30. It comes out being like 7 grams per day. So that person, in order to gain 2 pounds of muscle per month, needs 72 grams of protein. That's 7 grams per day to build that much muscle tissue, and that's short-lived. You're not going to gain 2 pounds for very long. So why is it that there is an anabolic response found sometimes and higher rates of muscle growth when protein is added in? Well, it's not because the protein is being added in for building blocks. It's because certain amino acids, and this goes back to my point to you guys, that we are not consuming protein to consume protein. We're not consuming protein to get protein into our bloodstream. We're consuming it to get amino acids. And amino acids perform different roles, but mainly we want the essential ones, because the non-essential ones our body can generally make as long as sufficient energy and building blocks are there. We can make them out of other things besides those amino acids. So really we are consuming protein for those essential amino acids, and there are a number of them related to muscle growth and protein synthesis, and it's not because those things are being used as building blocks. It's not that hard to get 1 gram of leucine per day in from your diet to be used for building blocks to build 2 pounds of muscle per month. It's just not that hard. So why are we consuming these things? We're consuming them because these amino acids in your muscle tissue basically work like keys in a keyhole, or buttons, fingers pressing a button. And these different switches that they turn on, or keys that they unlock and doors that they open, are what facilitate anabolic signaling, the response in that muscle to say to get bigger, to give it the tools it needs to get bigger, to open up certain pathways to allow other proteins to come in to rebuild new tissue and to build the muscle fiber bigger and thicker. And then all the other protein floating around that's not used, which for most people on the higher protein diets is just being oxidized for fuel, being converted into carbohydrates. You're not necessarily using it for this. It's leftover waste products because you needed those essential amino acids to turn these switches on, and you needed to eat a certain protein threshold to maximize that, and then everything else that's left is generally going to be oxidized for fuel, all these other amino acids from the protein. So you end up wasting a lot of the protein, or just use it as expensive fuel, trying to get those certain essential amino acids. And by taking in enough protein, or a large amount of protein, you're ensuring that you get all of the ones that you want. This is also why certain supplements like leucine are becoming more popular, because we know that leucine is one of the key ones to doing that. And if you are supplementing leucine into your diet through whatever mechanism, whether it's just added and spiked into your protein powders, like the Body Fortress whey that everyone is freaking out about was spiked with extra leucine. That was one of the amino acids it was spiked with. It just happens to be probably the most anabolic one. Or you're taking it in free form, or whatever. You're adding a branched chain amino acid to your diet, which you don't got to buy from a big supplement company. You can buy this shit by the kilo yourself. So it can turn these switches on without consuming all the extra protein. You could eat carbs and other things to get those same calories. It is a personal preference with today's technology. But the mistake people make is that when I say something like that, and I say, yeah, sure, people could cut their protein down under 100 grams a day, supplement in some key amino acids if they wanted to, and they would make the same gains that they would be making on their 150, 200, 250 grams of protein, whatever they're eating, because they're turning on all those switches and opening all those keyholes in the muscle tissue to maximize anabolic drive, muscle protein synthesis, all of those things. But the question people always say is, oh, if that happens, and if I just take tons and tons of this, then more is better. I should just up the protein. And that's where we run into a conflict. There's a finite number of these keyholes and switches and whatever, and we know when we study it, let's say with the leucine, we know that when blood serum leucine reaches a certain threshold, there is no further anabolic response. We can measure this. This is stuff that we can measure in the lab. It's been measured. And when you exceed that threshold, it doesn't do anything else, because there's no more keyholes to open or buttons to press or whatever you want to call it. They're all fully functioning. They're at maximum capacity. And once that happens, if the blood serum level goes up, you just start converting it into glucose. You start burning it for fuel. It just becomes carbohydrates at that point, just like all the other amino acids. So it's not like just the more is better, more is better. It's just, no, it's just these are things that you want to get adequate intake to ensure that you are activating all of those switches and turning everything on. But you're not eating all of this protein for the building blocks, because I just showed you with the basic math, building 2 pounds of new muscle tissue per month in a human requires approximately 7 grams of protein per day to go towards the goal of building muscle tissue. That's all the protein that's involved. So again, this protein is there for various metabolic functions. The amino acids, specific amino acids, are there for various metabolic functions, and they are there to turn on switches basically in your muscle tissue to allow the muscle tissue to absorb the nutrients you want and to use it towards structural purposes to get bigger. So hopefully that clarifies that and people understand what I was talking about now. Alright guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time. But let me give you guys a bicep shot before I go. Oh, Mount Bicephus.